It's the time of year when spring evolves into summer, and the days grow hotter. As we've experienced, the summer days grow hotter each year. We at UMD must protect ourselves and each other as we perform activities on hot and humid days. State and federal regulators are developing standards, and trusted institutes communicate guidelines with the goal of protecting us from serious conditions. UMD's Heat Safety Program uses those standards and guidelines to communicate measures to protect our community. This training will provide clear direction for you to understand how we must prevent heat-related illness at UMD. The objective of this presentation is to provide basic information for all of the UMD community to protect ourselves and each other from the hazards presented by heat stress. The program that is described will enable us to reduce this risk at all UMD locations. In this training, we will discuss the international, national, state, and local trends regarding heat, the hazards and health effects of heat stress that arise during our activities, methods to protect ourselves from heat stress, and the emergency actions to take in cases of heat-related illnesses. Global temperatures have continually increased since 1978, with the hottest days on record occurring recently. This trend has resulted in increases of heat-related illnesses worldwide. Trends in the United States are also troubling. Both heat wave frequency and heat wave length have increased steadily. All indications are that these trends will continue. As a result of the rising heat concerns, the Department of Labor is set to issue the first ever hazard alert for heat, and DOL will also ramp up enforcement to protect workers from extreme heat. At the state level, 5 states have adopted heat stress standards, namely California, Colorado, Minnesota, Oregon, and Washington. Maryland has had 3 community reviews of their draft program and are anticipated to release a heat stress standard in the near future. The UMD Heat Safety Program is documented to meet or exceed the criteria identified in Maryland's draft standard. These program elements include the Heat Illness Prevention and Management Plan that is required for all UMD departments, procedures for acclimatization, that is, the body's temporary adaptation to work in heat that occurs as a person is exposed over time, provisions for shade areas and drinking water, high heat procedures, high heat being defined as when the heat index reaches or exceeds 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the area where the work is being performed, emergency response, and training. This training will be updated annually. It's important here to note that MOSHA's trigger point for the provisions of the heat standard is a heat index, or feels like temperature, combining temperature and humidity. MOSH, and therefore UMD, directs that a heat index of 80 degrees Fahrenheit is the point when plans must be developed to protect our staff, many of whom are engaged in intense physical work, often wearing heat-trapping clothing, respiratory protection, etc. Let's take a look at some of the important developments locally. Though this will focus on conditions at College Park, similar conditions were experienced at all the UMD locations. In 2023, sweltering conditions were observed in late July, August, and early September. As you look at this graph, you will see dark red depictions which indicate these high hazard times, which occurred during the hours of approximately 10 a.m. through 7 p.m. Maximum work at UMD locations, for example, farms, facilities operations, and housekeeping, occurs during this time period. Drilling down further, some of the most hazardous conditions existed during early August. All of us keeping our eyes on these conditions, we will help prevent heat-related illnesses for ourselves and each other. Signs and symptoms of heat stress, and how can we identify the early stages and prevent something more serious? Conditions described here can arise during our activities conducted at times with a high heat index. All of the symptoms require prompt action. Heat rash occurs when sweat is trapped in the skin. Symptoms can range from small blisters and pimples to deep inflamed rashes. Some forms of heat rash are very itchy. Rhabdomyolysis is a muscle injury where your muscles break down. Weakness and muscle pain result. This is a serious condition
that can happen after an injury or excessive activity without rest. If you notice symptoms like weak and sore muscles and dark color changes in the urine, stop work and notify your supervisor, then ensure that you receive medical attention. Heat syncope, also known as heat fainting, is a form of heat illness that can occur when the body dilates blood vessels to cool itself. This can reduce blood flow to the brain. It arises in unacclimatized employees. The required acclimatization process, discussed later in this training, must be in place to prevent this illness. Symptoms include fainting, dizziness, and lightheadedness. Heat cramps are painful muscle spasms that can occur when the body loses a lot of salt and water through sweating. They can affect the abdomen, arms, and calves. Rest, shade, and replenishment of electrolytes are important here. Heat exhaustion is a condition that happens when internal body temperature rises. Symptoms may include headache, nausea, irritability, heavy sweating, thirst, weakness, and a rapid pulse. This can rapidly lead to heat stroke. Cooling, hydration, rest, and shading are very important when symptoms arise. Heat stroke is the most serious heat-related illness. It occurs when the body can no longer control its temperature. The body temperature rises rapidly, the sweating mechanism fails, and the body is unable to cool down. When heat stroke occurs, the body temperature can rise to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, or higher, within 10 to 15 minutes. This requires immediate action, including notification of emergency response and measures discussed in the emergency response section of this training. What can give rise to these heat stress injuries? Wearing dark, heavy, tight wool, nylon, or polyester clothing, including protective clothing, personal protective equipment, such as respirators, working in direct sunlight, insufficient water access, heavy physical work, medications, the high heat index, no breaks, no shade, a long workday, and a lack of acclimatization. These are the factors we need to address in our heat stress program. What has happened and what may we learn? Tragic events can happen to anyone at any time if preventive measures aren't taken. In early June, a 59-year-old man from Prince George's County suffered heat stroke and died. It was the first reported fatality in Maryland in 2024. This was not a work-related fatality, but OSHA reports on those that have taken place and provides simple guidance on avoiding them. There are many heat-related illness incidents in OSHA's database. One is included here. In this case, a young person while working in a tent suffered a heat illness. Those around her addressed the situation rapidly and took her to an area to cool off. This was a good example of personnel working with the employee to understand symptoms and catch the heat-related illness before it deteriorated into something worse. The following is a brief video provided by OSHA on managing heat stress.
Summer is here and it's getting hot. As temperatures and humidity rise, it's important to be prepared for the dangers of working in the heat. Dozens of workers die every year due to working in the heat, and thousands become ill. Most work-related heat deaths occur in the first few days of working in the heat. That's why it's important for employers to allow workers to gradually build that tolerance to the heat, whether they are new, temporary, or even seasoned worker. Heat illness can affect anyone, no matter how old you are or what shape you are in. Symptoms include headache, nausea, dizziness, weakness, irritability, confusion, thirst, heavy sweating, and a body temperature greater than 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. But heat illness can be prevented with 3 simple steps: water, rest, shade. Drink water every 15 minutes, even if you're not thirsty. Rest in the shade to cool down. Wear a hat and light-colored clothing. Workers can stay safe and healthy if we watch out for their health and remember 3 simple words: water, rest, and shade. Taking these precautions can mean the difference between life and death.
Reducing risks from heat stress should consider 3 basic concepts: hazard recognition or identification involves finding the potential heat hazards in the workplace. What are the work tasks and locations? What are the temperature and humidity levels? Is the work inside or outside? Evaluation includes a basic assessment of the hazard. How long will the work be conducted? Is the work light, moderate, or heavy? Have we learned about any personal risk factors from individuals who will perform this work? Controls involve the means we have and use to reduce the risk of injury or illness posed by the hot conditions. The hierarchy of controls, discussed next, establishes how the risks can be reduced. It is important to understand that as daily efforts are made to reduce these risks, we may learn positive or negative lessons on how to improve our approach. Central to any safety program is the hierarchy of controls. These range from most effective to least effective and include elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment. With heat stress, an example of elimination may include moving operations from outdoors to a cooler environment indoors. In this case, you eliminate the exposure by having personnel located away from the outdoor hot environment. An example of substitution can include completion of the work in the early mornings or to schedule projects in the cooler months. Engineering controls can include providing shade, reflective surfaces, or cooling spaces. Administrative controls are those things which affect work practices. What we are doing currently, the training, as well as establishing procedures with work rest schedules and hydration, are excellent administrative controls. PPE, the last line of defense, are items like breathable clothing, cooling vests, and hats with flaps. We've discussed the heat data and safety and health risks, and we've seen the proposed regulations for Maryland. What are we doing to comply and protect our community at every UMD location? An effective heat safety program must make clear the essential control elements for heat illness prevention. The UMD Heat Safety Program was developed to comply with existing standards, but most importantly, to develop methods to protect our community at all UMD locations. Central to the program is the Department Heat Illness Prevention and Management Plan that departments must use to comply and protect. The important elements include this training and workplace-specific training, as well as communications of the controls with all who manage, supervise, and conduct work in the areas presenting a heat hazard. Through this training and communication, managers and supervisors can understand the heat index parameters that serve as levels for decision-making as part of this plan. All employees must recognize health risk factors as well as the symptoms that may be exhibited at the onset of heat stress. Acclimatization enables the adjustments of the body that occur gradually during repeated exposure to a hot environment. The workload, effects of clothing and PPE must be part of managing the operations to minimize heat stress, incorporating hydration, shade, and rest schedules as part of the controls for this hazard. Lastly, all faculty, staff, or students associated with the work must prepare for these emergencies that arise. Located on ESSR's website, essr.umd.edu, you will find Ask ESSER, a resource for you to get support on any environmental, research safety, occupational safety and health, sustainability, and risk issues you may have, including the prevention of heat illness. Selecting Topics at the top will list the many categories of our services. Selecting Heat Safety will take you to the Heat Safety in the Workplace page. Here you will find the documented Heat Safety Program, Heat Illness Prevention and Management Plan that must be completed by each department, the daily heat illness prevention checklist that departments may use to guide them in the management of heat stress, and posters provided in English and Spanish for all faculty, staff, and students at UMD. Located at the bottom are resources that may be of further use in the management of heat stress at UMD. As you remember, responsibilities for managing heat stress begin when the heat index is at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and additional responsibilities come into play when the heat index rises further. Let's look at how the data may be obtained. By downloading the OSHA NIOSH Safety app from your App Store, you will see that it detects your location and provides the heat index there. You may also key in other locations to find conditions elsewhere. You can see that in my current location, this places me in the warning category. Selecting hourly at the bottom will show how the conditions will change from hour to hour. When we look at precautions, we see guidance provided for water and shade, emergency planning and response, work and rest, training, and additional precautions. Selecting Espanol at the top, you will see the same information in Spanish. Symptoms will provide those pertinent to heat stroke, heat exhaustion, rhabdomyolysis, heat cramps, and heat rash. Again, these are provided in Spanish. By selecting First Aid at the bottom, you are provided the measures to take for these symptoms. By selecting More at the bottom, you may get reminders about risk factors. You may also set reminders for rest and hydration by choosing days of the week, start and end times, as well as the intervals that you choose for getting these reminders. Roles and responsibilities identified in the written program include ESSR's Occupational Safety and Health Unit. OSH administers the UMD Heat Safety Program, that is, develop, implement, monitor for compliance, and review the heat safety program. OSH also monitors injuries, illnesses, and incidents related to heat safety and assists in developing corrective actions and lessons learned. Department leadership responsibilities include ensuring that the department has appropriate heat illness prevention resources available to employees and communicating responsibilities to supervisors within the department. Supervisors and managers plan for, implement, and monitor heat illness control measures for employees under their supervision. In cases where employees report risk factors that may make them more susceptible to heat stress, supervisors consider modified duty or direct the employee to submit for workplace accommodation through the University of Human Resources existing policy. Supervisors and managers also complete the Heat Illness Prevention and Management Plan, which will be covered in this training. Lastly, they must report all incidents to ESSR and participate in incident investigations. All staff must complete this training for the heat safety program. Notify the supervisor or manager of any health conditions which can impact the duties and provide the data that are associated with the conditions. Use the heat illness control measures available to them. Monitor self-conditions as well as check in on colleagues. Report all heat-related incidents to the supervisor. And report any hazardous conditions related to heat exposure. On several occasions during this training, I've made mention of the Department Heat Illness Prevention and Management Plan, which is required for all departments that have employees exposed to heat indices greater than 80 degrees Fahrenheit. We will now look at how to complete this. Let's look at the references that are helpful in completing this plan. These are located toward the end of the document. First, we have the National Weather Service Heat Index chart, which pairs temperature with relative humidity to provide the heat index, along with color coding, which indicates the likelihood of heat-related illness. These range from yellow, caution, to red, extreme danger. Next, you will see additional sources, including a link to a full forecast, as shown here. I will key in a zip code and see the forecast for that area. The next source is a link to the heat risk map, as shown here. I can pinpoint a location for the forecast and associated hazards, as identified by the National Weather Service. In this case, I've selected Washington, D.C., and see that the forecast includes a red-coded day for Friday and magenta-coded days for Saturday and Sunday. I can see that these days pose extreme risk. The supervisor or manager can then look at hour-to-hour data via the OSHA NIOSH Heat Safety app shown earlier, or several other sources included here. Next, we have a table providing examples of light, moderate, and heavy work to enable supervisors and managers to consider the heat index along with the planned work. Lastly, we have an additional table which provides information on heat categories based on heat index values and associated work, rest, and fluid intake levels to guide the plan. Understanding these resources will enable you to complete the plan effectively. Please understand that several sources are provided here so that you can always have access to trusted resources when one or more are not available. As you go through the plan to complete it, you'll notice that the questions asked in the plan are related to the criteria provided by MOSH that we discussed earlier. First, you will see days when the heat index is above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The initial question is asked to determine if everyone in the department has completed this training. The second question asks if you are communicating procedures to all affected employees. Are you receiving assurances from them that they understand the procedures? Question 3 asks, based on the guidelines included at the end of the document, how are you ensuring that the staff have access to drinking water? Question 4 asks the simple question about how the staff will be able to access the fluids. Question 5 pertains to the staff understanding the symptoms that we discussed and that are included in the OSHA NIOSH Heat Safety app. Question 6 pertains to preparations for emergencies. Though emergency procedures are included in this training, it is important that department-specific procedures are communicated to the staff. Questions 7 and 8, as is the case with earlier questions, is answered considering both the work rest guidance included in this plan itself, as well as the recognition of symptoms included earlier in this training. Question 9 is multi-part and pertains to how well we acclimatize personnel who are new, are returning to duty from time away, greater than 7 days, or are working during a heat wave, which is when the temperature is 10 degrees higher than the average high temperature from the previous 5 days. These staff must be observed for 14 days. This means having someone with the responsibility of being in communication with this person throughout these days. This can be accomplished via the buddy system. Risk factors and PPE are important considerations here. Question 10 asks how this is being communicated. Will the procedures be provided and discussed in brief meetings prior to the start of the day? Next, question 11 asks about the documented procedures for response to heat-related illness, monitoring, for example, observations, communications for emergency response, knowing how to reach the emergency contacts, and the means for transporting affected employees. How are these procedures communicated to all staff to make sure they understand? Questions 13 and 14 concern high-hazard heat conditions. Work, rest, and hydration adjustments become necessary with the increasing conditions. Communications for emergency response must be identified as part of the plan. A few things are worthy of mentioning regarding acclimatization. When an employee is newly exposed to heat in the workplace, heat index above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or returns to work after 7 or more consecutive days of absence from the workplace, that employee must be monitored for 14 days. Monitor means to look for signs of heat-related illness and to communicate with the employees to learn about symptoms that they may be experiencing. Communications are very important for heat stress and are done via phone, radio, a buddy system, or some reliable means of learning the conditions of the employees. In doing this, the manager or supervisor must use one of these methods. Develop a schedule which gradually increases exposure over a 5 to 14 day period with a maximum 20% increase each day, or develop a schedule that uses a combination of gradual introduction and alternative cooling and control measures that acclimate the employee to the heat. Recall the hierarchy of controls section that we discussed earlier. A few words are also necessary regarding hydration. The water must be potable, that is, fit to drink, fresh, pure, and suitably cool. Water must be located as close as practicable to the areas where the work is being done. The purpose of this is to encourage workers to drink water often and limit interruptions to work in order to do so. To ensure that water is fresh, pure, and suitably cool, it is recommended that supervisors visually examine and smell or taste the water prior to the work being done. For situations requiring emergency response and actions, it is important to keep in mind 2 steps: immediate contact and appropriate first aid measures. An example shown here is appropriate for someone suffering heat stroke. From the OSHA NIOSH Heat Safety app, directions are provided for steps to be taken, including the notification, the location to a shaded area, removal of outer clothing, application of compresses, and fanning the area where the employee awaits emergency response units. If someone is experiencing heat stress symptoms, your first aid goal is to cool them down and ensure that this person receives attention. In this case, a 44-year-old worker died of heat stroke while working on a farm. The person had been working in the fields for about a week. On this day, the heat index was between 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. At around 3 p.m., the worker reported to the crew leader that he was feeling ill. The affected employee drank some water and was driven to the employee housing and left alone. He was found unconscious 45 minutes later. Emergency personnel took the worker to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. His core body temperature was 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Feeling ill while working in the heat is a serious warning sign. This tragedy could have been avoided. Any employee who reports feeling unwell during work in hot conditions could have heat exhaustion, which can quickly progress to heat stroke if not treated. First aid for someone with suspected heat exhaustion or heat stroke involves cooling the body as quickly as possible, not simply drinking water. People with severe heat illness do not always recognize the risks that they face. If a worker shows signs of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, do not leave that person alone until they receive medical attention. ESSR recommends that supervisors or designees receive training in CPR. Please call ESSR at 301-405-3960 to be advised on this training. Remember these emergency numbers at all times. Thank you. ESSER is always available to answer any questions you may have. We may be reached via the Ask ESSER portal or by calling 301-405-3960. We are happy to provide in-person training whenever you need it. Lastly, let's be safe together.